Welcome, everyone, to this IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to give you actionable insights and strategies that you can apply from discussing the research of esteemed leadership experts and practitioners to take your leadership to the next level. My goal is that we have discussed something that's immediately practical and actionable to you and useful. And I'd love to hear your comments for this episode as you're trying to implement some of these learning outcomes. My guest today I'm very excited about is Jeff Haden, a contributing editor for Inc. magazine, articles read by approximately 3 million people per month. He's a speaker, ghostwriter, LinkedIn influencer, and author of the New York Times best-selling book, which I love, The Motivation Myth: How High Achievers Really Set Themselves Up to Win. Prior to changing careers, he worked in manufacturing for 20 years and worked his way all the way up from the entry shop floor to running a 1,000-employee manufacturing plant. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks, Charles. I hope I can live up to that intro. Wow.
I'm sure you will.
The esteemed word, that kind of made me shiver.
I love the humble attitude as well. With all your success, I'd love for you to just comment on how that transition happened, because I'm very impressed with your success, which spans two disparate industries. The first part of your career was in manufacturing, where, like I said, you eventually ran a 1,000-employee manufacturing plant. Then, which just blows me away, you were able to go into a completely different career with no prior experience or education in that area and have become super successful in this arena as well. Not many people can make that transition, especially like you did.
Oh, thanks. So the long story, which I will try to make shorter, went to college, worked my way through college, worked at a manufacturing plant, worked full-time there, went to college full-time, liked manufacturing. So when I was graduating, I interviewed for a bunch of jobs. They were all with 40-year-old men in cubicles. I would love to be a 40-year-old man now, but at the time, I was holding my fingers up in the sign of a cross thinking, no, please, no. And so the plant manager where I worked said, a big company is opening a plant here in town. You ought to go over there because it's going to grow. And if you like this, it's your opportunity. So that was R. Donnelley, which at the time were the world's largest commercial printers. So I started over there on the shop floor. I was the stereotypical college boy, which I think was an advantage because I already knew how to work hard and I had done it for 3 or 4 years in another setting, but no one expected me to be any good at what I did. And they thought I would whine and complain. So, expectations were low and I got to exceed them, which was really helpful to me. But the better part of it was that it was a company that would not necessarily give you more money, but they would give you plenty of opportunities to learn. And so I got to work. I became a machine operator. I got my journeyman's card, which I'm very proud of because I wasn't particularly mechanically inclined. Got to work in HR functions, sales stuff, customer service, different departments in the plant. I got to go to other plants, and like one of them, we bought the plant and then tried to de-unionize them. I can say that now. We couldn't say it then. But I got to have tons of experiences that I never would have had. My goal, even when I started there, was I someday wanted to run a plant. That was my dream. And 17 years in, I reached it. 2 years after that, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. It wasn't that it was bad, but, and I've told this story before, so hopefully people that are listening won't feel it's too repetitive. But the day I realized I needed to do something different, I was sitting in my office and a person came in, and within a sentence or two of him talking, I knew what the next 20 minutes were going to be. It was going to be him talking, me empathizing, me listening, me asking some basic questions, him talking some more. I knew exactly where it was going to go. And what I really just wanted to say was, look, you and Jim just need to get along and do your jobs. And so I thought, okay, that's not particularly leadership-y. And at the same time, it means that if that's what I'm thinking, I'm probably not serving the employees that work for me as well as I can. And so that didn't feel too good either, because I like to think that whatever success I had was because I was good at developing people and working with people and seeing them succeed, and their success fostered my own success. So I would say that I was discussing my frustration with my job. My wife would say that I was whining about it. And she said, well, what else would you rather do? And I don't know why, but I said, I think I would like to write. I had never written, no journalism background, no anything else. My college degree was communication arts, which at the time was the major for people who didn't know what they wanted to major in.
I agree with. Yep.
I came out of school with nothing but a piece of paper, which is okay. But I thought I would like to write. And so, but I didn't do anything with it, which I'm sure people can relate to, where you think, I would like to do this, but you don't actually do anything. And so I kept whining, and she kept saying, what do you want to do? And I would say, I want to write. And so finally, I guess she got tired of that. And so she came home one day and said, I got you your first writing job. And it was a guy that had a little startup, and I don't know where she met him, but he needed a press release. And so she said, I got your job. You're writing him a press release. Never written a press release before, never read press releases. It's probably the lowest paid per hour job I have ever done, because it took forever. And I finally got done and thought, okay, this is the best I can do. He liked it, asked me to do a couple other things. That was cool, but I was still, of course, doing my regular job.
Right.
And then one day she said, oh, by the way, I signed you up on Elance, which it's Upwork now, but it's one of those freelance platforms. And she said, I created you a profile and you've got 2 jobs. I was like, ooh, okay. So again, I was terrified and scared and thought, I don't know how to do this, but I tried hard and worked hard. And so to shortcut the story, I finally quit letting her bid on jobs for me, because I decided I really should be choosing my own jobs. But I, developed some people and developed some repeat work and you get rated there. And so I had really good ratings, and I was able to do better work. And I looked at it and thought, okay, this isn't replacing my salary, but I'm doing okay. And I see a path maybe to where I can get to somewhere that I would like to be. And my wife, who is, by now you can tell, is both my biggest supporter emotionally, but also practically. She said, give it a try for a year, work really hard, give it a try for a year. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back and work somewhere. And I felt pretty confident with that. And so I did. And so I worked really hard at it and wrote some books for people and got to a better place. And then I just tried to leverage off of that. So I'll stop there since I've gone on way too long. But the real thing was that here's, I guess, the best way to put it. For people that think they might want to change and do something different, stick with your job, do a great job at your job, because that's where your bread is buttered. So when you have something on the side, you almost need to be better at your primary job, because people will eventually realize you have something on the side, and they will look for cracks in the performance veneer that you have.
I agree with you more.
So you've got to,
difficult to do though.
Yeah, but you've got to commit to, I'm going to kick butt over here. And then all of your me time, and I just used air quotes, your me time is your side hustle time. And you need to see that as, hey, that's me time, because that's where I'm trying to make a difference in my life and do something better for myself, or get to some other place that I want to get to. And then you've got to work really hard over there. And then at some point, there's that balance place where you can find out, one, do I really want to do this? Because what you think you want to do, oftentimes when you're in it, isn't as fun as you thought it would be. But then 2, is this something I can make a living at? And do I want to switch to that? And then 3, do I really want to do it for the next 4 or 5 years? And do I have a buffer that allows me to get away with it? So in retrospect, I didn't really think it through that way when I was doing it. But in retrospect, that is clearly how I approached it. But that is the thing. The people that say, oh, you got to go all in, you just got to quit, you got to dive right in. Well, okay, maybe that works once in a while. But if it doesn't, and you have a family, right, what you going to do? So if you really want to do something different, you have to commit to saying, okay, then my life is not going to be particularly fun for a while, but the investment that I make in terms of time and effort and sacrifice is one that will get me to a return that I think that I want to have.
That's so important, because right now we're going through the great resignation, right? People are wanting to change careers, and there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And I would argue, I know friends, I know family, I know associates that have done it the wrong way. Like what you were saying, just go all in. You hope you get the support of your family, could figure out a way to make ends meet. But if you're supporting your kids, it's a tough environment, a lot of stressors in. That's a more sound approach to take. And thankfully you have a strong work ethic, which from other interviews I've heard you give about with your grandfather, and your wife's super supportive. And like you said, you've married up and she is willing to support you. And whatever way possible. And those are essential things, right? Because if
Yep.
those aren't in place, then you may not even be successful, regardless of the approach that you take during that.
There's two key points there. One of them, you are correct. As far as my marriage, I outkicked my coverage. There is no doubt about that. I did learn a lot from my grandfather. And then one thing though, since this is leadership focused, I have friends that own businesses and they're dealing with the great resignation. And employees will come in and say, hey, I'm going to leave because I've got this idea and I want to go do whatever. And a few of them get really mad, and they think, how could you do this to me? Because it feels like a betrayal, even though it's not. But some of them are savvy enough to say, all right, I get that because I was you and I went out and did my own thing. But let me tell you, it's hard and it's risky and it's scary. So if you really want to do that, here's what we can do. And they'll sit there and kind of lay it out and say, stick with this for 6 months. Stay here. I'll try to help you on the side. I'll try to give you a little bit of advice. I'll do whatever, but see if you can make a go of it. And then if you do, you're going to leave with my blessing and my support and all that other. And if it doesn't, we'll be glad because we would love to have you. And it's worked really well. Sometimes the people have found that they can make a go of it and they leave, but they leave with fond memories and they leave recommending that as a place to work. And they help boost the place's reputation. And the ones that it didn't quite work out come back thinking, okay, the grass wasn't greener. So I'm going to do a really good job here. So that is an interesting approach. You don't have to see a resignation as all right, we're done. We're wiping our hands. You've betrayed me. Sometimes there's a way to bridge it. It's not easy, but sometimes there is a way to bridge it. And the more you need talented people, the more it's incumbent upon you as a leader to try to bridge it. Because if you don't, you're only hurting yourself.
Couldn't agree with you more. The quote that comes to mind is about the grass is greener on the other side. And I've heard the quote where the grass is greener where you water it, right? So where you're paying attention
Yeah.
to and where you're cultivating is where it's going to be greener. And that's a great segue because a lot of people want to do things with their life, but they feel like they're waiting for that lightning bolt of inspiration to come along and say, this is what you're chosen for. This is your correct path. And it doesn't happen that way. And I love how you kind of flip that approach, that belief on its head in your book to say, that's not how motivation works. It's not something that you get. It's something you create, right?
Right. Yeah. That's the genesis of that. And the idea for the book was I am fortunate enough that I get to interview really successful people. And one of the things I talk about is kind of those early days, partly because it's interesting and partly because successful people like to talk about the hard days, because they didn't come out of the womb successful and they're proud of the fact that they worked hard to get to where they want. And not a single one had that moment where all of a sudden in a flash, they discovered their passion, they discovered their purpose, they knew what they wanted to be the rest of their lives. And that was enough to carry them all the way through. They all just had an interest in something and decided to give it a try and put in the effort to find out if they enjoyed it, could be good at it, and could take it somewhere.
Well,
And
that's
so,
important.
and I contrast that with all the people that continue to write me to say, hey, I would love to do X or Y or Z, but I just can't seem to find the motivation. And I always say, well, then you don't really want to do that because all you need is enough motivation, which should be that initial spark of interest to say, let me try that. So if you want to run a marathon, all you really need to be able to do is go out today and try to run a mile and just put that in your pocket. And then if you do that, and if you're realistic enough to say, wow, that's pretty good for me because I haven't run in 20 years and I'm out of shape and whatever. So I be proud of yourself. You just did something really hard. That feeling, that positive, I feel good about myself feeling, that's enough to get you to the next day to do it all over again. And so that's really the premise is you create motivation on a daily basis through the effort that you put in and the small little bits of success that you get. And what that becomes is, I don't know, if you think about things that you like doing, typically they're things you're good at. And so when you get a little better at something and when you've improved and when you start to think, hey, I'm kind of good at this, you don't have to motivate yourself to do it anymore because you enjoy it and it feels good and it's part of your identity. And all that came not from a lightning bolt, but from some effort that you put in And then the realism of, I don't have to be able to run 26 miles yet. I just need to be able to run a mile. And I should feel good about that because I just did something that was hard for me.
So much good stuff to unpack there. Going back to what you said about all the successful people that you met, many of them, yes, they're smart. Yes, they're creative. They're often talented, but that wasn't the crucial thing to their success. The one thing that you did notice, right, for the majority of them is what you kind of alluded to is they started on the downside of advantage. So
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
a great principle, not saying that the middle class, or if you started with a lot of things that you've been afforded, you can't succeed. There's just some commonalities with a lot of the super successful in doing that because humble beginnings create that perfect foundation for success, right?
Yep. Yeah. I think that everybody, at least if we take this to business, the people that have built businesses that have IPO'd or that have been taken over or been sold or whatever at some massive level, every one of those people that I know were bootstrappers who, had the stereotypical start in the garage, flip an old door up on saw. I literally know a guy, the guy that started, the company's called Exact Target. They were bought by Salesforce. They actually went public, then were taken back private by Salesforce. But he and two of his buddies, they had some old doors in a garage and they flipped them up on sawhorses. And that literally was their desk, which sounds like a Hollywoody thing, and they probably got it from Hollywood, but that's the money that they had. Every one of them sees that hard times early beginning as their advantage because they didn't have money to throw at problems. They didn't have people to rely on to help them out and see them through tough times. All they had was themselves and their own creativity. And it's that theory of constraints that says that typically constraints create creativity, and that the more constraints you have, the more creative and innovative and thoughtful you have to be, and that takes you somewhere. And so for anybody that's listening that does feel like they're on the downside of advantage, that can be your advantage if you choose to say, wow, I got nowhere to go but up. And if it is to be, it's up to me. And that's actually a cool thing. And for someone who worked for a Fortune 500 company for 17 years, eh, sometimes it's really good if it is to be, it's up to me. That's really great because the farther you rise, actually, the less control you often have.
Great insight on that. The other piece that I picked up when you talked about the marathon example is that the difference between goals and systems, right? James Clear, his famous book, Atomic Habits, said, you don't
Yep.
rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And in setting a huge goal, like a marathon, if you've never run before, the distance between here and there is a chasm, is a Grand Canyon sized chasm, right?
Yep.
So if you have that as the thing that's forefront in your mind, you're going to get discouraged pretty quickly from what you said when you could only run a mile.
Right.
But if you let those daily habits of running just a little bit more each day build up, make yourself feel better, that builds that virtuous cycle where you feel that you have these everyday rewards that's propelling you along that path.
Yeah, you say it better than I can. The idea for goals, people will often say that, you need to pick your goal, you need to put it on a big banner, you need to look at it all the time because that's going to motivate you or whatever else it is. But to use the marathon example you just did, if you're starting from zero and you're looking at 26 miles on the wall, the idea that you have to actually do that, it's not inspiring, it's daunting. And so your goal, you do need a goal, clearly. And it can be a huge goal, but then that goal should just inform the process that you create in order to get to where you want to go. And so early on, that process may just be, I will go run a mile today. And that's a good thing because if you run your mile today, you can Seinfeld check the X off the calendar because you wrote a joke today, and you can say, I did it. You can feel good. For that day, you get to feel good because you did what you set out to do. And if you think about some of your worst days, they are usually when you had things you wanted to do, personal, professional, whatever, they didn't get done. And you feel like the day was a waste. Think about your best days. They don't have to be some grand achievement. Usually it's because you had a number of important things to do and you got them done and you feel good about it. You may be tired, but you feel good about the fact that you did what you set out to do. And so setting the goal and then forgetting the goal and focusing on your process, that's what can keep your motivational drips going because each day you get to be a success. If all you can think about is the 26 miles that you have to run, and today you barely managed 3, you do not feel like a success. But if today you managed 3, you were successful. And if you look back, which is fine to do, you can go, yeah, 2 weeks ago, I couldn't even hardly run a mile. Now I'm doing 3. This is working. I am getting somewhere. And that makes you realize that with time and effort and repetition and being consistent, you can get to where you want to go if you give it time. And if you created a process that has a good likelihood of getting you to where you want to go, which is another subject altogether.
And maybe we can get into that in just a little bit, but just getting on that and just driving that point home, because I think this is so critical for leaders to know that there's a lot of habit science is becoming more and more popular. BJ Fogg has a great book. Charles Duhigg started it out. James Clear developed it. But the ultimate goal, which I believe with all of them, with habit science these days, the ultimate goal in developing a new habit is becoming that kind of individual. It's identity change.
Right.
So what you're stating right now is reinforcing that identity. I'm not someone that runs marathons. I'm a marathoner.
Right.
And you even, in one of your other interviews, I noticed, you even have daily questions that you can ask yourself that, would a marathoner do it this way? I mean, I'm using that as a context here, so that it's reinforcing that identity. It's building it up over time so that no longer do you have to worry about, is the habit going to stick or not? You are now that individual. You are a runner.
The founder of Southwest Airlines, gosh, I can't remember his name. His way of making decisions was he focused everything through the lens of one question. It was, will this make Southwest Airlines the low-cost provider? So if you have that kind of framework for decisions that you make, where you boil it down to some essential question, then you could be asked 50 questions a day, and it's really easy. Somebody comes along and they want to talk about different snack items on a Southwest plane. Well, is this going back as low cost? No, well, we're not doing that. So it's really easy. And you can extend that to anything in your life. If you're a leader and you walk by and you see 2 employees who are clearly in conflict, the easy question to say is, would walking by and ignoring that be something that a good leader would do? Well, the answer is no. So now you have your decision. You don't have to go through, wow, but that's Bob and him and Jim. They don't get along very well and they've got different agendas. You don't have to deal with any of that. It's like, what would a leader do? And it's, would a person who wants to run a marathon skip their workout today? No. Does a person who wants to lose 20 pounds, would I eat dessert? Would I eat more dessert than I planned today? Whatever it is, you can boil things down to a simple question, and then it makes it really easy. And then as far as the identity thing, do you have kids?
I have 3 kids. Yeah.
Okay. So do you wake up in the morning and have to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to take care of my kids today? Do you have to do that?
No.
You don't, because you're a parent. It's part of your identity. You are a parent. And what's interesting about that is, as you gain some skill or expertise or experience in something, you go from being a person who does certain things to a person who is those things. So like you just alluded to, I'm not a guy who, if you have trained for a while and you've had some success with it and you see yourself as part of this process of running a marathon, you don't sit there anymore and say, wow, I'm a guy who has to go running today. You say, I'm a runner. You don't say, wow, I'm a guy with a clipboard who walks around and, checks off boxes. You say, I'm a leader. So that you become those things. And when something becomes part of your identity, then you don't need motivation, because it just is who you are and it is what you do. And so you don't have to motivate yourself to be a parent, because you are a parent, and good leaders don't have to motivate themselves to be good leaders, because they are leaders. And that was the little point for me where I realized that maybe this was a time, for me to go and change careers, because I realized that I was thinking things that good leaders would not think, which was, wow, I really don't want to have this conversation. I just want to tell you to shut up and go to your job, which doesn't reflect well on me, but it does happen to people sometimes. And then that's a good sign that maybe you need to do something different.
Let's talk about that serial achieving, right? So
Okay.
Identity change, once that habit becomes your identity, you no longer need motivation. Love that. I've seen it work out personally, professionally, many times. Before we talk about serial achieving, the process to start your day to help you accomplish your goals, because I think a lot of people still have issues with that. We've alluded to some of those, but there are some things that people do that really hurt them and cause them anxiety, or for them not to be able to achieve those goals. One of them is the past, right? They're stuck in the past. And what you state in the book is let your past inform your future, but don't let it define your future. You got to learn from your mistakes of others or of your own and then let it go. But that's so hard for a lot of people. But I'm sure you found that to be the case with all the successful people you've known, right? It's they have that ability to do that.
Well, and that's one of the places where routine and having habits that you developed and having a process that you follow can really help you. Because if yesterday was a disaster, instead of if you have a routine you follow and it's something that's consistent for you, you can almost take solace in that to say, okay, yeah, yesterday was terrible, but I know if I do the things that I typically do that are positive and make me successful, that it'll still be a day today, because you get really good at, okay, that didn't go well, but that's okay because I know what it feels like and I know I can move past it. The people that I know that tend to get stuck in the past have only one or two things that they are really trying to do. And when they don't go well, they don't know how to deal with it because that is their identity and they are kind of stuck. So you can, I'm not saying you should set out to fail all the time, but you should do new things that at least stretch you, because that is a muscle you can flex and you can make stronger.
One other thing that I wanted to kind of focus on that was just, and you give a lot of great advice in your book about this, learn to ignore the things you have no control over. A lot of people have difficulties with that, especially with an internal locus of control for the leaders. I feel like they need to control everything. The one that I've seen and I've struggled with as well is don't resent, but celebrate the success of others and resist the temptation to complain, criticize, and whine, because all of that reduces your energy, and your energy is better spent doing more productive things.
Yeah, there's some quote, I forget who it was, but they basically said every minute that you spend thinking about things you can't control is energy and time wasted on the things that you can. And so if you think about it that way, the problem is it's an interesting, I don't know what the word is for leaders, because on the one hand, it is your job to care about lots of stuff. You know, and inherent in being a leader is that you are going to want to care about lots and lots of things. The downside of that is that you care about lots and lots of things, and therefore you think you need to improve or control or somehow shape them. And you can't do all of those things. And frankly, you shouldn't. The times that I did best in my manufacturing career was when I had really good people who I left alone and turned them loose, and they knew what they needed to do and they knew where they wanted to go and they knew I would help them if they needed it. But otherwise, it's yours, run with it. They did a really great job. They developed themselves. You know, there's this myth that leaders develop people, and I think we do to a degree, but the best development is when you put people in positions where they can develop themselves, because we always learn better from our own mistakes and we always learn better from the things we do. When something is mine, I will always care more, I will always try harder, and I'll always do a better job, and I'll always learn more. So that to me is that whole dichotomy of control, is that I am in control, but I should try really, really hard not to be. And that's okay. And then when you do that, you free up some mind share for the things that you can control and you can focus on. I have friends that say that this is a terrible habit of mine, but I don't watch news, don't read much news, don't keep up with politics, I don't keep up with a lot of stuff because it sounds terrible, but I can't control it. I can't do
Right.
anything with it. And in large part, most of the things that some of my friends get most worked up about are things that don't even impact them at all,
Exactly.
like zero. And so, and I'll say, why do you care? Oh, but you have to care. We need to care. And we're like, well, I know we do. And I understand that, but you know, you're not getting anywhere. It's not doing any good. It frustrates you. It upsets you, and it makes you less effective on the things that you could control and that could make a difference in your
You're
life.
absolutely right.
Or if you're a caring person and you're upset about these things because of what's happening in the world, but if you can't do anything about it, you've just lost time and energy that you could spend on something that would make your world a better place, or the little small portion of it that we live in. So, wow, that was a really long around the barn answer, but control what you can control, let the rest go, because if you work really hard on the things you can control, it is always better and things will always get better directly where you have influence.
Great insights there. I had a leader on the other day on one of the episodes, and he talked about more of just being selective in what he allows into his mind. He said, everyone talks
Mhm.
about air pollution. No one talks about mind pollution. What are you filtering into your mind, right? That you just don't need, that you can't control, that's going to cause you stress and anxiety. Let it go. Be willing to be ignorant on those things so you can focus on the essential 2 or 3 things that are really going to make a difference in the quality of your life.
Yeah. And that extends to so many things because forget like just the things you can't control. But if you think about your job, say you're running whatever company you're running or your department or whatever it is, there are probably 2 or at the most 3 central initiatives or programs or processes that your folks that you are in charge of that make the most difference to your overall results. So you can try to mess with 20 and do a crap job at all 20, or you can say, okay, right now, what matters most is sales. And so I'm going to spend 90% of my time on sales because if we can improve our sales, that will fix a lot of other problems that we already have. But pick 2 or 3 things that are the biggest drivers of success for what you do and focus on those. And occasionally, when the others pop up, you can kind of dip in and deal with that or whatever. But I had a boss that used to say, we are at the point where we can't save our way to profitability. And he was right. No matter how hard we tried to increase efficiency or everything else, we didn't have enough revenue coming in to offset fixed costs and some of our overhead. And so his whole thing was that we are all going to become salespeople because that's what we have to do. So I'm here running a department that manufactures books. And he's talking to me about being a salesperson. I thought, how am I supposed to do that? But we actually figured out a way that I ended up being part of some of our sales processes, and it worked out, and it was successful. And so, there's usually 2 or 3 things that make the biggest difference, and that's where you go. And that's what I always tell people that if they get a leadership position in another company, or they buy a company and they're going to be in charge of it or whatever else it is. And they say, what should I do in my first 90 days? That whole 90-day thing is a big hot button for people. And I always say, just pick out the 2 or 3 drivers of success for whatever that is. And that's your focus. And that's what you care about the most. And you'll learn about all the other pieces, but that's where you need to spend your time because that's where your success is going to come from. Because if you try to just step back and let me take the time to learn about everything and everybody and all the different various areas of that standard orientation time where people take 3 months to learn the business. Well, that's 3 months that you wasted and you've lost any momentum you would have had. So I'm big on pick your 2 or 3 things and focus on your 2 or 3 things. And if you're drifting from them, when I started writing, anything that I did that would not generate revenue, because I needed revenue, I would just say, you know what? Can't do that now.
I mean, say no, we could spend a whole hour and just say no. And that's such a critical leadership attribute in and of itself, because saying no, because by saying yes, leaders don't realize how many things they're saying no to. So that's
Right.
so critical. And getting back to just, that's one common thing that I hear from a lot of leaders. They tackle too much. That's personally, I had that issue as well. I think I can do it all, right? And it's better to be a meaningful specific and focus on 2 or 3 things than a wandering generality where you're just trying to be effective or marginally good at many different things. And Tim Ferriss in his book Tools of Titans, he says that the superheroes that we have in our mind, the billionaires, the icons, the titans, are nearly working flaws who have maximized 1 or 2 strengths and have built daily habits around them. So it's so critical to really focus on those and not get too general.
That is an interesting point about the no, because anytime you say yes, you are automatically limiting your ability to say yes to other things. And so, but what happens, it's another thing that leaders fall into, and it's an admirable quality to be the kind of leader that says yes, because you don't want to be the kind that says no to everything. You want to chase new ideas. You want to support employees' initiatives. You want to do all of these things because you're trying to do the best job you can. But there is a point where you get the capacity issue is a problem, and probably you're chasing some things that don't matter.
Right.
And you're not necessarily casting the right shadow for your employees because you would like them to also be good at saying no to things that don't drive value and that don't create results. So it may take time and people do get disappointed when you say no to them, but if you explain why, usually that works out. And especially if you do the improv thing where instead of yes and you go yes or you say no and here's what you can do or here's what
Right.
we can do. So
No, that's great. I love that. The comedy piece that really actually, and I think it's out of Chicago, that comedy group that developed that, and it's so effective in leadership. So now when leaders, so when they feel like they can do a whole lot, even though they want to, right? They're kind of forced down these areas. Then what I find a lot of times is they look for hacks, for shortcuts to success, because they still don't want to let go of it entirely. So they thought, okay, well, I can't spend a couple of years to develop my skill in this area, but is there a way to get a shortcut? Maybe I can have a hack here that really will make me effective in this area without putting in the time and the effort. And I completely agree with what you say in the book. There are no shortcuts or hacks. I mean, to accomplish anything worthwhile, you have to work hard, and the only way is the hard way.
the only hack that I know of for a leader that will allow you a shortcut is if you find a person who has the skill that you do not have and you turn them loose to do that thing. And maybe you can learn a little bit vicariously or on the side or whatever else, but there is no other hack where that is concerned. And it's an interesting subject because I did switch careers. So I'm going to sound a little bit hypocritical with this, but typically the things that you are really good at, you're better off focusing on those and finding ways to broaden the impact that those make. And then spend a little bit of your time working on improving some other areas. Because if you turn your back on what got you there to try to become something else, then all that time that it takes you to get there is time, especially if you're leading people, where you're probably not doing as good a job with that as you should be while you pursue whatever it is you're chasing. So I always, my thing is I try to leverage what few strengths I do have. And when I learn new things or try new things, they're off to the side. And hopefully they someday become complementary. But the sea change is hard. And I know that because going from what I used to do to what I do now, they were not all easy years.
Well, and the career capital that you built up in the manufacturing sector didn't really translate or have any impact. I mean, it did in a sense that it got you aware of those leadership topics, that you were really mindful of what are those pain points of leaders. But in terms of your writing style, how competent you were as a writer, that was all kind of learn as you go, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the one
Exactly.
hack though that and maybe it's not a hack, but what I love in the book that I think leaders could institute, because I love to give them practical, actionable advice from this episode, is when you say stop saying can't and start saying don't. And can you just kind of unpack that for us to say, what does that perception difference? I mean, I know what it means and I think it's great, but I'd love for you to kind of unpack that for our listeners so they
From
can
a
stop saying can't.
Yeah, so it's a personal thing. So there was a study where researchers got three groups together. One of the groups, and there was a behavior change they were trying to make. And so one of the groups was told to say, whenever they felt a weak moment, I can't make this up, have that piece of cake. Another group was told to say, I don't have cake. And then the third group was given no coping strategy whatsoever. They were just turned loose. So at the end of that time, the people who had been successful with their behavior change were the ones that said, I don't. The ones who came in second place on the success ladder were the people given no coping strategy at all. And actually, the people who were told to say, I can't, did worse than people with no coping strategy at all. And the reason for that is that saying I can't automatically opens up a negotiation with yourself because you could, I could do that. And so maybe, yeah, I'll have that cake tonight because I'm going to run tomorrow, and I'll burn the calories off or whatever else. And you create this negotiation. Whereas the I don't people, it became part of their identity, which we talked about earlier. And so I don't miss workouts. I don't ignore employee conflicts. I don't, whatever it is. And if it's part of your identity, then it's really easy to make that change. So, from a personal point of view, saying I don't is way more powerful than can't, because you can. You always
And you're
can.
consciously choosing not to do it.
Right.
And that's what the don't phrase really
Yeah.
reinforces.
Don't,
which
and,
is-
and can't requires willpower, because if I can't, I have to force myself not to. Whereas don't, it's just why I don't do that. I don't eat sardines. I don't like them. So I don't have to, there's no willpower exercise there whatsoever. I can't eat them either because I don't like them. But so it was a terrible example, but you get the point. And I don't know I just thought of something else that probably is going to take us off of the beaten path, but I want to go back to it since this is a leadership podcast. We were talking about that whole cycle of routine, success,
the
fulfillment,
virtuous cycle, right? Yep.
creating motivation. One thing leaders can do that's great for you as a person, but you can flip that around and try to create scenarios where it helps your employees as well. So if you're running a sales department and, my goal, I work for you, and my goal at the end of the year is to do 20 million in sales, big number, especially if this is January. But if I have processes that you expect me to follow, which I'm sure you do, because there are best practices to everything, or there are at least common practices to everything. And so if one of my goals or one of my processes is to make 20 cold calls a day, sounds terrible, but let's pretend that that's what you have to do. Then even if I don't make very many sales today, if I do my 20 cold calls and I do a good job with them and I try hard, I can at least feel good about the fact that I did what I set out to do that day. And so it goes back kind of to the, what is it? It's a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. Whereas if I didn't do a very good job of selling today, if I have a fixed mindset, oh, I'm not good at sales. That's pretty defeating. The growth mindset is, hey, I can get better at this. I can learn at this. I did my 20 today. I'm going to do my 20 tomorrow. I'm going to get better and better and better, and I'm going to be good at this. So as a leader, if you can create processes that are effort based as well as outcome based, then the effort-based processes allow people to have those successes on a daily basis that carry them to the next day, even if they didn't get
You're
the
right.
outcome that they wanted. And so when you design some kind of goal for people, if you can build in some routines, processes, milestones, whatever they are, that allow people to feel good, even if they are not maybe progressing towards the goal as quickly as they hope, because no goal is ever achieved linearly. There's always ups and downs. Then it allows people to find that motivation themselves to keep them going, so that you don't as much have to be constantly nudging, because we are always more motivated when it comes from inside ourselves than we are when it comes from someone else who is pushing.
Couldn't agree with you more. That's a great book by Carol Dweck on mindset.
Yep.
And a lot of leaders have looked at it, and I've implemented it in my own family with my kids. Instead of telling them they're smart, I praise effort, right? And you can take that same philosophy into the workplace and really do that. And we've differentiated on past episodes between appreciation and recognition and how they're different. And everyone needs appreciation. I don't think anyone's ever said I'm just too appreciated in my job, right? Recognition should be reserved for those accomplishments because not everyone gets a gold medal, but you can appreciate someone each and every day. And I've always encouraged people to do that more because we just don't get enough positive reinforcement, especially in this day and age. So
Yeah, there's lots of those little phrases, like instead of, great job making that sale, it's like, hey, I know you worked really hard to rescue that customer. That was great. Or I loved how much time you took to walk that person through whatever that was. I appreciate the effort. When you appreciate effort, you show not only that you're a growth mindset kind of person, but also most of us would like to be appreciated for our effort. We like to be appreciated for outcomes, but it's nice to hear somebody who recognizes that, hey, you worked really hard on that, because
not just your mom, right? I mean, it's
right.
nice to, right.
It shows that they paid attention not just to what happened at the end, but to what you were doing. And leaders who pay attention and who recognize the fact that maybe something was hard and that you persevered, or that you put in a lot of time, or you went the extra mile, or whatever those things were. Well, that's when you get that kind of recognition. Not only does that feel good, but it creates a situation where you will probably do it again because you realize that it is also appreciated.
You give a lot of productivity. I know we don't want to say hacks, but productivity
Yep.
tips in your book. And I just want to share a few. And then after I share those few, if you want to speak to anyone, that's great. But
Okay.
these are these are common sense, maybe some counterintuitive, but I love some of these tips that I wrote down. So take productivity breaks, not relaxation breaks. These breaks should reinforce your sense of activity and accomplishment, and take them, which I love this, at counterintuitive moments. The key is to take a break at the end of the day or at certain times of the day by leaving yourself a fun place to start back up. That's golden. I mean, that to me is, it works. It's great. I don't know how many people do it. They feel like I have to get on with this task, and then they're just not inclined to want to go back to something that they really don't look forward to. Why not end on a high note, right? And the other one is obsess about leveraging edge time. Look at throughout your day and identify those downtimes in your schedule, whether you're driving to and from work, you're taking the elevator, right? Those are those small moments of time that you can leverage and be more productive during those times.
Yeah, the one about stopping in the middle is, and it works really well. If you're doing something and it's going well and it's fun and you get to this place where you can see the finish line, but you're having a good time, that's a great place to stop because you will be excited to pick it back up the next day. And if that's your first 45 minutes the next day, say, you win because you went into the day excited and happy about doing it. You built momentum by getting that done. You feel good about the fact that you've accomplished something important, and that momentum carries you to the next thing. Whereas if you finish the day with it, that's awesome. But now tomorrow, you're starting from zero somewhere, which may not be as exciting. And as far as the edge time thing, I got that from, I guess, Jim Whitehurst, who used to be the CEO at IBM. And his whole thing was that if he leaves the house and doesn't have like 5 or 8 or 10 things that he can do if there are down moments, then he feels like he's already wasting his day. And it doesn't mean that you have to be frantic like a squirrel, running around collecting nuts, but it's like I used to commute 2 hours one way to a job. And every once in a while I would get stuck in traffic and have to sit. I always had a book with me. Seems stupid, but I always had a book with me. And so if I got stuck, I wasn't happy, but I had my book. And so I would sit in the car, and while everybody else around me was fuming, I would read. And Jim would he would save things he wanted to read. He had a podcast queued up that he wanted to listen to. He wouldn't have to sit there and search for something. It's that whole idea of, what do I want to do? Not what will I do at this moment. And the best example I can use is if it's been a long day, you sit down in front of the TV and you search for something to watch. What's going to happen is that you're going to fall on the least objectionable thing that you find. And it may not be what you wanted, but if you have 2 or 3 shows in mind that you have been wanting to see, and you get that time and you say, okay, I am going to sit down for half an hour and I'm going to watch something. If you have something in mind to watch, now I know this doesn't sound right, but it's productive
Right.
because it was something you chose to do and wanted to do, and you did with intention. And so it feels good rather than, stumbling across Rocky for the 40th time and saying, oh, this is the part where he goes, yo, Adrian, I think I'll wait and see how that goes. So the edge time thing is an advantage for a whole lot of busy people, not because they're slaves to the grind, but because they have a few things, even if they're just fun things, that they will say, if I end up in a dead moment, I know what I'm going to do, and I'm going to use that in a way that is good and fulfilling to me.
I think that's important. And I'd only qualify that as I found that to work well for me when it's shallow work. And I contrast
Yes.
that with deep work, like with what Cal Newport states in
Mhm.
his book, because you still need to allocate certain parts of your day for large blocks of time to really go deep, because we're living in a culture where a lot of the work is shallow.
Yep.
We're distracted continually with our electronic devices, or we're responding to emails throughout the day. It's
Yep.
so critical for leaders to have allocated time each day where they're deep in thought, working on those essential few things that they need to get done that
Yep.
differentiates them and their brand.
Yeah, there's a big difference between deep work and edge time. Edge time is those occasions where you don't necessarily have control over what is happening. And so it's like, okay, I'm stuck in line here. What am I going to do? As opposed to, I'm going to go in my office. I'm going to let everybody know that for the next 45 minutes, I need to work on this presentation, unless it's an emergency, let it go. But I'll get back with you when I'm done, and then sit down and focus, which a lot of leaders struggle with because they think their door always needs to be open and they always need to be instantly available. But very few things that people come to you with that they think are urgent are actually important. And you train the people around you to treat you the way that they get to treat you. So if you always respond to emails within a minute, you've trained people to expect an instant response. If they can come in your office at any moment, even if the door is closed and you're doing deep work and they can interrupt you with something trivial, you have trained them to assume that that will always be that way. And so
That's an
part
important
of,
distinction to make.
yeah,
Right.
part of your job is to say, all right, what works best for me as a leader? What therefore serves the people that I lead best? And if that is pockets of deep work where you sit down and really focus on things that you need to accomplish that will make your organization or your people or whatever it is better, part of the price, with air quotes, that goes with that is that you actually have to carve out that time to do that.
Right.
And you have to let people know that that's important. And that's okay. And the best way to do it is to also expect that your people have time when they can do deep work too. Because if that's the shadow you're casting and that's what you're saying to people is like, hey, I know you need to work on this proposal. We're going to leave you alone, let you focus. If you show that that is important for your folks and that you support it, then it's a whole lot easier for them to support it when you are doing it yourself.
Could agree with you more. I know, want to hit on serial achieving, work your number real quick, and then
Cool.
love to get some advice from you of all the people you've interviewed. You've interviewed the who's who in so many different industries. If there's one or two things that you can give our leaders listening to this podcast advice from of things they could put into practice, make habits so that they could be more successful. But real quick about, because we alluded to it earlier about serial achieving, why do you advocate this approach?
There's a, I- this is especially true for now that I'm old, I can call them younger people who, you come out of college and you think, okay, I've got to figure out what my path is and I've got to, arc out this career, or even if it's just personal things that you're going to devote a whole lot of time and effort to. And you think, well, that needs to be a lifelong pursuit or else why should I do it? But I think it's really cool to have a whole series of things where you do something for 3, 4, 5, whatever years, however long it's fulfilling and exciting to you. And if you get to a point where it's no longer as fun, to say, hey, that was really awesome. Now I would like to try this. And what's cool about it is that it feels like you wasted that other 5 or 6 years that you just went through, but you don't, because you carry all these skills, you carry things you learned, you carry other experiences with you, connections. Those inform whatever it is you go off to do next. And so I think it's important for people to accept the fact that sometimes whatever path you were on was great for a while, and maybe it's not as great or it's just not as fulfilling, but there are other things that you could do, and that's really fun. The most interesting people I know have done a variety of things along the way, and they've collected all these experiences and people and memories and things, and I think that's really cool. So that's the serial achiever side. Now
Love that concept.
you'll have to remind me of the next what else I was supposed
So
to say.
work your number real quick,
Oh,
work your number approach. It lends itself well to the goal because it's really just, you have to get in the daily number of reps, right? So if we go back to the marathon example, you just got to run a mile each day. It's an everyday commitment to dealing one more if you
yep.
choose that following, or just keep the streak from breaking that day. So you're not worried about the end goal. You're worried just about that daily number, whether it's sales calls, whether it's miles that you run, whatever the case may be, right?
Yep. Yeah. And you can even broaden that. There are a lot of things where success is based strictly on accumulating a certain number of repetitions or steps or whatever else it is. So, like, I like to ride bikes. And if I want to go ride, if this September I want to go ride a Grand Fondo up in the mountains near me, I know that for me to be able to do the 100 miles, 12,000 feet of climbing, whatever it is, I'm going to need to put about 3,000 miles in my legs between now and then. I know that. That's my number. And so I know that if I do that, I will be successful. I know people that have started businesses where they've said, okay, I need to make 10 customer contacts a day for the next month, because based on my experience, 2 of those will turn into really good leads. 1 of those will turn into a customer. And if I work that number at the end of the month, I can hit a certain revenue target that I need. So you can break a lot of things down into, what do I need to do every day? And if I accumulate all of that, I will become whatever it is I'm shooting for. Some things you can't do that. Creativity is really hard with that. But then again, like I alluded to earlier with the Jerry Seinfeld thing, one of his processes early on was he decided that, a good comedian has good material. And therefore, to have a lot of material, you need a lot of jokes. And so he had calendars, and every day, part of his process was he would try to write one really good joke. And when he did, he put an X on the calendar. And so his line about it was, my whole job was to keep that string of X's going. Never miss a day, never miss an X. And if I accumulate enough X's, I've got 15 minutes of material. I've got 30 minutes of material. I've got 45. Then I can start swapping stuff in. And so it was just keeping your head down and doing the work and working your number, because if you accumulate enough numbers, you will get to where you need to be. And that can be as simple as, if you've got 30 employees, just saying to yourself, okay, every day I'm going to spend 15 minutes where I have a check-in with one person. And if I do that every day, I will rotate through my group every month, and I will have regular time to spend with them. And if I work that number, I will be much more connected to my people and have a better sense of what they're doing and what they need from me than if I did not do that.
Great stuff. And I would add that I've heard from a lot of leaders too, that what's the difference between a successful person and those that are less successful is that when that streak is broken, they get back on the horse quicker. They don't let it just spiral downward. It's one day they miss. They don't miss a whole week or a month,
Right.
or just forget about the goal altogether. They say, that was fine. Let's start a new streak and let's begin today.
Yeah. Yeah. That what you do when you fall is so much more important than the fact that you fell. And that's especially true with diets. If you screw up breakfast, then you think, okay, my day is shot. I might as well just eat what I want for lunch, and then dinner, and then it becomes tomorrow, and then it becomes whatever else. But it was just breakfast. So, okay, that didn't go so great, but I'll go back to what I'm supposed to eat for lunch, and I'll move on.
Perfect. And so to end the episode, want to hear from you, from all the people that you've interviewed throughout the years. And it's really spanned so many different industries. If you could distill down maybe those essential 2 to 3 things that you hear that are the common denominators with a lot of these successful people that they have going for them to help our listeners out.
All right, so this will probably not go where you want it to go, but this is
I'm
my
fine with
answer.
that.
This is my answer. So I have talked to lots of successful people in a wide variety of fields. And the one commonality that I take from all of those is that each one of them is an average, normal person who just worked really, really hard to be really, really good at one fairly specific thing. In all other ways, they are decidedly average. I'm decidedly average in all ways. And for them, they've got that one thing that they worked really hard to be. And so that's not a criticism at all. And I think it's empowering and motivating for people,
I,
because
I feel the same way.
they don't have some special education that you can't get. They didn't have connections that no one else had access to. None of them were super wealthy and trust fund babies and whatever else. And they don't have some special something that the rest of us don't have. They just picked something and worked really, really hard to get really good at it. And so I I think that's empowering, because the super successful people are just like you and me, and that's a good thing. And then the other one, so there's a band called Avenged Sevenfold, and the guitarist his name's Sinister Gates. I think his name's actually Brian, but Sinister Gates is a stage name. And so we were talking about performances, and he was talking about how their lead singer, who he describes as easily the most confident person in the world. I think he said cocky, but nonetheless, but before shows, he sometimes gets sick because he's really nervous. And he said it's such this weird thing that this guy who's, he walks into every room and it's as if King Kong is there, but yet he's, getting sick backstage. And he said, and for him, and this is a staggeringly talented guitar player. He says, I'll be on stage and there's 30,000 people, but I'll see that one guy somewhere up front who I'm convinced is looking at me, and this is supposed to be this hot guitar player, and he sucks. And he said, and I'll find that person, and I know that's not what they're thinking, but I'll get hung up on it, and I can't get it out of my head, and it happens all the time. And so his line was, I won't say it quite the way he said it, but his line was, everybody is some sort of effed up. And so I actually think that's a really cool line, because if you scratch the surface of any highly successful, highly accomplished, highly whatever person, they've got their things. They've got their foibles, they've got their eccentricities, they've got their weaknesses, they've got whatever else. They are just like all the rest of us. They just worked really hard to be really good at one thing. And so if there's something that you want to achieve, some place you want to be, something you want to become that will be part of your identity, you can get there if you're willing to actually try to get there and work hard to become what you want to become, because they're no different than you or I. They just worked really hard. And so can you.
That's a very empowering statement to end on. And I believe that wholeheartedly. I mean, you don't succeed because you have no weaknesses. You succeed because as you find your unique strengths and you focus on developing habits around them. And habits are so critical to have. I love the Herb Keller statement that you mentioned, where he just asks his employees those questions and just reinforces that identity on a daily basis, which is so critical. Thank you, Jeff, for joining me today. I hope I didn't take too much of your time, but remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you.
I write for Inc. Magazine, Inc.com. I'm not very active on social media, but I am on LinkedIn. And so if you want to connect, I do connect with people. And if you send me a message, I promise I will respond. It may take me a few days, but I promise that I do respond to people.
Wonderful. Well, this concludes this episode of the IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com. If you'd like to subscribe, this podcast can be found both on Apple and Spotify, and can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know that makes a difference, but what you do consistently.